What's up, y'all? It's your boy JTMM, aka Just 10 More Minutes, aka the Freaking 10, back again with more of the Sabaton history. This time, Aces in Exile Part 1. Now, in the song Aces in Exiles, it talked about how, they were from different lands and how they put them through training, even though they were already pilots. But I didn't get the full gist of why they necessarily, exile, right? So, I'm really looking at the history to answer that. So with that being said, let's check it out.
Out in the skies above Britain by the British and the Germans.
And a lot of other nations.
Yeah, that's what this is about today. The spring of 1940 had seen the German Wehrmacht sweep through the Low Countries in France with unexpected speed and ferocity. No one in Britain had expected France to fall so quickly, and the British forces had barely escaped back over the Channel in time. By the end of June 1940, it seemed to many that Great Britain stood alone, and if they chose to keep fighting, they might face invasion or starvation. But Britain also found itself unexpected allies. As much of Europe came under Nazi rule, not only did the now exiled governments of 6 European nations seek refuge in Britain, but they also brought thousands of their soldiers, pilots, and air crews. The defense of Britain relied on its air force. Should the Royal Air Force be defeated, then even the powerful Royal Navy would sooner or later succumb to German air superiority. The British had, in fact, lost quite a few pilots during the evacuation from the continent, and the coming battle for Britain would be fought on a knife's edge. So it seemed like a perfect match, A host of experienced pilots and crewmen, far away from their country but with the desire to fight, and a country in dire need of reinforcements. The British and the foreign governments came to the same conclusion. However, it's one thing to have a pool of new pilots, and another thing to unite them into an actual fighting force. A common enemy and the ability to fly a plane was simply not enough. First, the British government had to create many political necessities from scratch to legitimate the presence of foreign forces on their soil. The first step was to fall back on the Visiting Forces Act from 1933. This was initially designed to allow soldiers from the Commonwealth, like the Canadians, to station military forces in Britain without transferring their jurisdiction to the British authorities. Expanding on this law, they created the Allied Forces Act, which now legitimized the exiled governments as well to keep their own forces stationed in Great Britain, right? This was important because the Polish, Czechoslovakian, and French governments did not want their forces to simply be assimilated into the Royal Air Force. It also started a bureaucratic nightmare. The Commonwealth soldiers did have it easier. The Canadian pilots of Squadron 401 had arrived June 21, 1940, a month before the British skies were darkened by streams of German bombers. Squadron 401 had been originally established as the first fighter squadron of the Royal Canadian Air Force in 1937. Although they had their most experience flying outdated Armstrong Whitworth Siskins, they had just recently been upgraded with more modern Hawker Hurricanes. Now, the Hurricanes were slower and not as agile as, say, the Bf-109 or the Spitfire, but they were easier aircraft to master. Squadron 401's main task was to engage and shoot down German bombers, mainly Dornier 17s and Heinkel 111s, and leave the dogfights with the Messerschmitts to the faster Spitfire squadrons, right? Although the 401 was mostly spared the political bickering, they still had to train and to upgrade their planes by British standards. Their baptism of fire came in late August as they met the full force of a German bomber attack head-on. The Canadians pounced on the bombers, but dogfights with the German destroyers were tearing holes in their formations. The 401, known as the Rams, repeatedly fought to exhaustion. Every aerial victory was hard fought, and the Canadians were willing to make great sacrifices to protect Britain's skies.
Okay, so the exile piece is more of that they were parts of exiled governments that had come into Britain more than them being exiled within Britain, I guess is the easiest way to say it, to where they felt like outcasts. That's where my thought process was. But now I get it. Now it's more of that these were governments that, you know, had been exiled into Britain, and so now they were working with them as far as fighting on the same side. Okay. Now it makes more sense.
The fighting did not stop the political scheming behind the scenes, of course. For the Royal Air Force, it was clear that any pilot serving in a British uniform, irrespective of his nationality, would have to serve under the same military code as the British pilots. The exiled governments, however, wanted to be recognized as actual allies, not just associated powers or foreign volunteers. The independence of their pilots gave them not only political prestige, but legitimacy in representing their occupied home country. If any pilots were sick of those political wheelings and dealings, though, it had to be the Czechs and the Slovaks. Since the Munich Agreement and the consequent invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1939, those men had been forced to flee their country and seek refuge in neighboring countries until they made it to France. But the French did not exactly welcome them with open arms. Instead, they forced many of the Czech and Slovak soldiers to either join the Foreign Legion in Africa or be sent back over the border. Only a few had the chance to fly some outdated aircraft during the Battle of France, before more than 4,000 of them made it over to Britain. There, under the guidance of President Eduard Benes and Foreign Minister Jan Masaryk, they had their own fighter and their own bomber squadrons established as part of the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve by mid-July 1940. But still, many of them felt that they were again being held back. Lots of British officials initially had little faith in them and treated them as an amateurish, low-ranking force. They trained and reorganized until the middle of August, while the skies of southern England were fought over ever more viciously. When Squadron 310 was given a chance, it quickly proved its value. They began fighting their own private war against the Germans, actually, often going so far as to pursue them back over the Channel. Their determination quickly earned them a reputation as reckless daredevils, but every time they tore into the German formations, they produced results. Soon, the Czechoslovakian insignia was proudly painted on the wings of their planes, and their red lion graced the fuselage. Respect was hard-earned. Every German plane shot down, every medal won, and every daring exploit of their fighter and bomber crews was documented and featured in their own newspapers and newsreels. This was to bolster morale and to show their critics the value of their commitment. By the end of the battle, no one doubted them any longer. Their 37 confirmed kills and many more damaged enemy bombers earned them the recognition of the top brass.
Do you think that... Do you think it was an... Arrogance is not the right word, but for lack of a better term, let's use that. Do you think it was an arrogance to think that these were not good fighters just because they came from a foreign land and were untested? Because I guess for me, if someone comes in and says, hey, I can do all this stuff, the first thing I want to do is test that, right? Not hold them back and do it. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because, you know, if they can't, now you've just not only lost a pilot, but you've also lost a plane. So I guess it's a double-edged sword in a sense, but I wonder why any of these were held back for so long, if it was all political, you know, or if it was just thinking that they were lesser and that the RAF was, in fact, you know, like the best there is, the best there was type thing. Just curious.
Like the Czechs and Slovaks, the Polish refugees had been treated with suspicion and discrimination by officials. Polish General Zajec had gone personally to Winston Churchill to tell him that the Polish fighter pilots were eager to give the Germans some payback and that their maintenance personnel were already familiar with British-made airplane engines. But the RAF judged the Polish temperament as too individualistic and problematic. You know, though, most of the exiled pilots from Poland were experienced veterans of the 111th and 112th Escadra of the Polish Air Force, and many had seen action in the skies over Warsaw in September 1939. Serving for the British, Fighter Squadron 303 was less of a new formation and more of a symbolic continuation of their own Air Force. Nonetheless, the men of 303 had to be introduced to new technical details like modern throttles and speed propellers and even retractable undercarriages. The PZL P-11s they had flown before were actually closer to a World War I plane than the modern Messerschmitts they now had to face in combat. But they adapted quickly. When a German 110 was shot down during a simple training flight, the British were convinced that 303 was ready. Throughout September and October 1940, the squadron repeatedly clashed with the Luftwaffe, contesting British airspace with every sortie, and the Germans had to pay a high price for every Polish fighter they shot down. During the German attack on the London docks, the 303 alone claimed 12 Dorniers in one day. Flying for the 303, the Czech Josef František, nicknamed the Lone Wolf, became the highest scoring Allied pilot of the Battle of Britain, with 17 confirmed kills. The squadron continued to aggressively attack the Germans in dogfights over London, making 303 one of the highest scoring squadrons of 1940. By late October, the danger of imminent invasion seemed to be over, at least for the time being, as the British Air Force finally gained the upper hand. And many British officials agreed that had it not been for the foreign pilots, the outcome might not have been the same. Indeed, 1/5 of the Royal Air Force did not come from the British Isles. Next to the Poles, Czechs, Slovaks, and Canadians fought Free Frenchmen, New Zealanders, Norwegians, and volunteers from the United States. But although the Battle of Britain was won, the war was far from over. So the pilots in exile would continue fighting with the RAF until they were relieved of their duties at the end of the war. Over the war years, the British would also put quite a large amount of money and resources into cultural and educational programs for the foreigners. Since they did not just fight the same enemy, fly the same planes, and eat the same British cuisine, but also lived in British communities, they were to be integrated as much as possible. Learning the English language was the first and most important step. And once they understood more than just military orders, the foreign pilots were no longer confined to their own groups. These educational programs did a lot to overcome initial resentment and kept morale high so that the men felt comfortable serving and living in Britain.
You know, I think that's an important key of it. You know, it because, you know, how much of it was done to integrate them but still respect their culture that they came from, right? I mean, the war at this point was far from over. And even though they'd kind of, you know, intertwined together, I mean, they're still, you know, missing their homeland, I would imagine. That's a tough one because, you know, I get the resistance, you know, but these are, it's all hindsight 2020. I mean, it really is, because I look at this and I'm like, okay, so these were pilots that came over once they were able to, you know, either flee from their country, you know, their government was exiled now in the Great Britain. Yeah, you wonder how the war would change had they been in the air sooner. I don't know, this one baffles me a little bit, if I'm honest.
Winning the war was only possible if they worked together, despite their political and cultural differences. With time, they grew fond of each other as respect was earned and sacrifices were made. Everybody lost friends, and everybody had to get on with the fight until the job was done. Today, many different veteran associations still remember the Battle of Britain as the defining moment of the Allied war effort. British monuments still speak of their deeds and emphasize how much they had to thank their own and the foreign pilots alike who came to their aid in their darkest hour. For them, never was so much owed by so many to so few. Before we talk a little bit about the song, there is a game about Aces in Exile, yes?
Yeah, and
Tell us about that a little bit.
Coming here soon, so we can play it in another episode.
But you don't have one with you?
No.
Okay, but we'll play it in another episode.
It's a couple of years ago, but we were there at the premiere of it, and it was kind of coinciding with the idea of our song, and then this game.
It's a board game.
Board game.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Is it for 2 players, 4 players? Different amount? Or?
You're 2 people.
So it's really one side against the other.
Yes.
About the song, it's interesting, the Aces in Exile. Now, we've obviously talked about the Poles and the Czechs and the Canadians and so forth many times in the regular World War II episodes on my World War II in Real Time channel. And they often get overlooked and forgotten, you know?
Yeah, that's why a lot of people in these countries really wanted us to write a song about it, because they are like, Britain takes all the credit for the Battle of Britain.
Yeah.
We also have, of course, in the song, which deals mainly with Czech, which is Far From the Fame. But this specific song itself was written way earlier than that.
Yeah.
It's from the 2010 album Coat of Arms. It was one of the last songs written for the album, and I remember how long we were working with it because it has so many different elements in it. It was a very inspiring song to work with musically. Actually, a lot of the parts that were written for that song as well were so damn good, so they were used in other songs later.
Okay.
I guess if you ask anybody of the band members, like, what's your favorite song from Coat of Arms? It's Ace in Exile for most people. And when Tommy joined the band, he was like, can we play Ace in Exile, please? It's his favorite album, and it's his favorite song. I think the song would fit into any Sabaton set list at any time. It sticks out. It's something very uplifting, very cheerful, very heroic, very happy song. So I'm sure that at some point we're going to bring it back.
Well, it's interesting that you say it's uplifting and heroic, because it is, but those men, especially like the Eastern Europeans and stuff, they were not treated, even at that time. I mean, we say, they're overlooked and forgotten today, and they are less and less, but they still are to an extent when people talk about the Battle of Britain. But some of them were not treated especially well even at the time, you know?
No, obviously. And I guess that's why a lot of people also, please, Sabaton, can you tell our story? Or can you tell their story? Because nobody else did.
To not be allowed in the victory parade and stuff, even after. Although there are some really good, like, little personal stories from them that a couple I mentioned in the World War II thing. Like there was a Polish pilot, and he parachuted out over Britain, and he landed in a British tennis club, right? And so they cleaned him up, put him in some new clothes, checked him in as a guest, and he played tennis, and he won too. And I thought that was pretty good.
Okay.
And there was another story. A Polish guy, he parachuted out and he got stuck in a tree, and the locals came. This was way in the countryside with actual pitchforks, and they thought he was German because he obviously wasn't. And his thought, he said, so I said in the best British accent I could, fuck off. And they go, okay, he's not German and stuff. So
yeah, I still struggle with that. I really do. And I guess, it's a different time and place. You're in a country that's being attacked by Germany. You really don't know who's on your side or not. You've got these governments that are coming in that are in exile. you have these soldiers that are now coming in, and soldier mentality is different than a normal mentality. I mean, you are very protective of your own. So I get it, but I don't get it. But it's a completely different time and place. It's still mind-boggling when you think about them fighting on their own on the same side. But to their points earlier made, under what rules, under what guidelines, all of the political stuff. I'm sure guys just wanted to get up there and fight for their homelands more than caring about who they reported to. Let's finish this one out.
There's a lot of those little stories like that.
Awesome.
So there are those stories of heroism, and of course, the bulk of the British people are well aware of the role that any of those Canadians, Czechs, Poles, all the others played in Britain. It's nice that it's getting more and more attention, particularly thanks to guys like you today.
There was a movie created about the 303rd not long ago.
Okay.
And a pretty well produced movie.
Yeah.
And I was in contact with them and hoping that they would feature our song somehow.
Yeah.
But this shines a light. I mean, there are so many people often talking about, oh, Sabaton, your music is perfect for having soundtracks of movies. And we see that a lot of people use our music for YouTube videos where they like borrow the material from different movies, and then they add our music and create their own videos. We love it. It's really cool, and I think it's a great thing when people do that. I told these movie makers, like, if you do not like agree that we do this together, like we produce something, and if we don't do it, fans will do it. And none of us will have the profit or benefit out of it. The problem with the movies is that there is always like this music producer.
Yeah.
And he has his vision. This is what the music's gonna sound like in this movie. And then you suggest something for that person, and they are absolutely not interested in hearing. But I don't give up. So maybe one day they find our music in a movie.
And any of you producers out there, just remember, Per, who's written a lot of songs about things like World War II, World War I, war, more war, peace, occasionally, international peacekeeping forces. See, I got that in, didn't I?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, well, to all you young producers and old producers out there, that is it for today for Sabaton History.
Thank you, and see you soon again.
Next week.
Thank you everybody for watching, and thank you everybody for supporting. And those who don't do it, click the bell, subscribe, and become a patron. Thank you very much.
You know, I didn't comment a lot on this one because it's almost very self-explanatory, and I don't want that to come across the wrong way. But, you know, at first I was questioning, okay, well, what did they mean by exile? Were they mistreated? And the answer is yes, but they really didn't touch on that kind of till the end, where they said, you know, not allowed in victory praise and thing like that. I don't want to say it's misleading in a sense, because I get it in the sense that, you know, they came in, they wanted to fight, but they were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, then the political battle comes in, and then, you know, being mistreated, things like that, not recognized, neither will fly. That's more, it just seems like more political BS than anything. Because at the end of the day, as you saw, right, a lot of them got along, they became friends, brothers, right, for life. That was a weird one for me. That really was. That's the first one where I really sit back and I'm like, And not the song. The song is great. I love the song. I see why Tommy would be excited to play it. And I can only imagine, you know, it was what? He came in like 2012, I think it was. Because I can just picture Tommy in typical Tommy fashion, just being, you know, a complete lover of the music, and then going in and being able to join them. And being like, can we play this? Can we play this? That just screams Tommy. This one was interesting. I don't know that I'm going to cover part 2. You know, unless y'all have watched part 2 and there's some very interesting things in there, let me know in the comments. I think I'm going to stick with this one because it kind of covers the whole gist, and it gives me a very good idea of what happened. So I don't know that I'll necessarily do part 2 unless y'all really want me to. So that's going to do it for this one. This one was different. I can't pinpoint what it is. I don't know if it just wasn't interesting to me as some of the other ones were, or what it was. But let me know what y'all think of this one. This one just maybe didn't connect with me as much as the song did. So with that being said, y'all know who I am and what I'm about. I'm JTMM. Like, subscribe, and share. I'm out.